Well, hey, it's JB Brown back with Built to Sell. And today, I'm going to talk about trains for a second. Specifically, if you've ever gone anywhere on a train, and I've had the privilege of being on trains all the way from my home city in Atlanta with Marta all the way to China and some of the gigantic bullet trains that they have, one thing you notice is that when you get on these trains and you go to your destination and you finally arrive and you go to get off, the door opens and the first thing you see are bright yellow letters on the ground near you that say, "Mind the gap." Mind the gap. The gap is simply the little space between the train you're standing on and need to exit and the platform that you're attempting to step onto. That gap ranges anywhere from probably 3 inches to 8 or 9. And I have seen people exiting a train or entering a train accidentally step into the gap and hurt themselves. Fortunately, I've never seen anything worse than that, though I'm sure it's happened, hence the bright yellow sign. But anytime you go anywhere on a train, you're going to see "Mind the gap." And it's meant to, as you're exiting, keep you aware that there could be danger in that exit and that you just need to be aware of it. Similarly, someone with decades of experience in working with business owners to both grow and eventually exit their business, whatever that looks like, be it to a third party, be it selling it back to the employees in an ESOP or management buyout or some combination of those things, there are a very finite number of important gaps that you have to be minding at all times. So today, I'm going to walk you through 10. There's really only 10. Everything else shoots off from these 10 gaps that you have to mind when you're growing your business and preparing for an eventual exit someday. Gap number 1 is what's called a value gap. Value gap is the difference between the business's current value today and the value is needed to meet the owner's financial goals post-exit. Oftentimes, owners will overestimate their business's value and they will underestimate the amount that they actually need to fund their desired lifestyle. Reasons for this are proximity bias, being too close to the business and believing that it's worth more than it actually is, not understanding the market or the timing of the market that you're in, or what I call golf course and bar valuations, which is you're, playing around a golf and, somebody in your duo or foursome says, "Oh, a buddy of mine's cousin's dog sold his business and he got this," or a similar situation at the bar. That's not a valuation. You have no way of knowing if that person has any idea whatsoever what they're talking about, nor do you know that even if they're being transparent and honest, that the information they were given was even true, because often the value of announced deals publicly in a tombstone ad is very different than what the actual compensation was to the owner. So value gap, the difference between the business's current today, right now value to a neutral third party and the value that you need to meet your financial goals post-exit. Gap number 2, that's the profit gap. This is related to the value gap. The difference between the business's current profitability and the profitability that will be required to maximize the value of the business by improving operational efficiency, reducing expenses, driving revenue growth. These are crucial things to closing this profit gap. It's also compared to the profitability of similar best-in-class companies to give you a benchmark. So if a best-in-class company in your sector, their net profit is 22% and you're 13%, you know that you've got a gap there that you have to fill. So that's the profit gap. Number 3 is the wealth gap. The wealth gap is the shortfall between you as an owner's current personal wealth, including the business's value. You want to put that in there. And the wealth that's required for financial independence, FI, post-exit. Minding this gap requires a combination of personal financial planning and increasing the value of the business. The two are married together and they must be done in parallel in order to bridge any wealth gap, generally expressed as net worth. Number 4, management gap. This is a lack of strong independent leadership within the business. So transferable value depends upon having a leadership team that can sustain growth, hit benchmarks, guide the organization and the business without the owner's direct involvement. Because without this, we now have significantly increased risk for a potential buyer and an increased importance on the owner remaining involved after any sort of transaction takes place. That's a management gap. Number 5, customer concentration gap. This one is overlooked all the time. This is the risks that are both perceived and real posed by relying on a relatively small number of customers for a majority of your revenue. Diversifying customer base reduces risk, and it also makes the business more attractive to buyers. So this is not just about the sheer number of customers you have versus what percentage of those customers generate the majority of your revenue. That's one piece of it. But this can also be true with contracts. So if you're the type of company that deals with a lot of contracts, say you're in the government space and you're making something that the United States government buys, and they represent 60% of your company's annual revenue, that's enormous risk because anything can happen in contracts, and there is no guarantee that those contracts are going to continue in the future. This is the same with manufacturing contracts or any type of contracts. And often we can look at, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5-year contract as a strength of our business. The problem is, if that contract represents too much of your revenue, buyers not going to view it as a strength. They're going to view it as a threat and a weakness, because what happens if that revenue walks out the door? So customer concentration gap is the 5th gap that we have to mind when we are thinking about strengthening the business and preparing for an exit. Number 7, this is a process gap. And simply put, a process gap is a lack of documented, scalable processes and systems within the business. It's the show your work component of it. There's 2 times where that matters. One is in the financials and the other is in systems and processes. Buyers are going to look for businesses with consistent operations and processes that are replicatable, that minimize risk and ensure a predictable performance, because the less predictability that we can show a buyer, the greater their perceived risk is going to be. The greater their perceived risk, the lower the offer, if there is an offer at all. So that's the process gap. Number 8, talent gap. Difficulty attracting and retaining the right talent to sustain growth and value, and building a strong incentivized team is so critical for long-term success and a key driver of exit readiness. The more talent that you have in your company and the more predictable you can be in attracting new talent and retaining the talent that you have, the more attractive you're going to be. And that does tie back into the management gap that we discussed earlier. Number 9 is a planning gap. Planning gap is simply the absence of a comprehensive plan at all for growth, exit readiness, personal financial goals for the owner. Without a clear roadmap, owners often leave a lot of value on the table, and they don't meet personal objectives because they were never measured in the first place. It's very difficult to hit a target if you haven't identified what that target is, simply put. So it's very important that you have a plan for both the owner's desired eventual outcome and what's going to be necessary in order to achieve that, the business's ascent between its current status and where it needs to be in order for the owner to exit, and then what's going to happen after the owner does exit. Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. Studies show 75% of owners 1 year after exiting deeply regret it. And it usually doesn't have anything to do with money, and has everything to do with the idea that an owner who's used to jumping on Monday team calls to see what's going on, logging into a dashboard to look at metrics, working toward consistent objectives and strategies within a company, going to events that are centered around the business that you're in, that's your social network. All of those things after you close they're gone. And most owners think that's what they want, and they probably do. But going from your identity being tied to all of those things to waking up one day and suddenly everything that you were is no longer true and you have to figure it out. It's jarring. And so having a plan in place for what you're going to do after you exit your company is just as important as anything you do during the time you're there. Finally, here's the 10th gap. It's execution. Execution is the thing that ties all of these together. Any great exit plan, any great growth plan, any personal development plan, any wealth plan is only as good as your ability to consistently take action in pursuit of the opportunities that you have identified for improvement. Because without action, no plan is going to do you any good whatsoever. So if there is a gap between execution and stated objective, you're going to be in trouble. If you hire an advisor and they come up with the greatest plan to grow your business, to solve for a specific issue, to help you achieve a personal milestone as an owner, whatever that may be, but there's no plan in place and accountability to take meaningful, consistent steps in action to achieve completion of that plan, what have we really done? So those are the 10 gaps that I consistently see in businesses that folks don't mind all that well. And you have to mind the gap, because similarly to stepping from a train that just stopped onto a platform where there's a 10-foot drop, you do not want to get your foot stuck in that gap. And as a business owner, you don't want to get your foot stuck in any of these gaps because you just didn't have the ability to either know they exist, identify where you fall in a spectrum of gap, and take consistent, specific actions toward eliminating these things. So hope this was helpful. If it was, please do me a favor. Go ahead and like the channel, like the video, share the video, listen to it on iTunes as podcast. I'm just making up companies as we go. Listen to this on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Appreciate you.